Sophie Laurent, a 30-year-old black woman and civil servant at the French Ministry of Justice, arrives in the small Provençal town of Saint-Rémy. Her mission is to investigate allegations of systemic racial discrimination within the local police service. Despite her experience and professionalism, she immediately senses the cold reception awaiting her. Upon arrival, Sophie is struck by the sharp contrast between the picturesque charm of the town and the tense atmosphere that seems to envelop it. The colorful facades of the houses and the cobbled streets seem almost unreal, an idyllic setting that contrasts with the wary, sometimes hostile, glances she receives. In this community where traditions are deeply rooted, she is seen as an outsider, a disruption to the established order. The first day of her investigation involves a series of meetings with local residents and officials. Most of the interviews go without major incident, but Sophie senses a palpable reserve in her interlocutors. Some seem particularly cautious, their answers often evasive, as if every word could have undesirable repercussions. The turning point comes during a visit to the town hall, where Sophie has gone to obtain additional documents related to complaints filed against the police. As she is about to leave the building, she finds herself face to face with 3 officers on patrol. Their arrival is marked by palpable tension, and their eyes fixate on her with a mix of suspicion and disdain. "Your documents, please," demands the imposing officer, his deep, authoritative voice resonating in the warm afternoon air. Sophie slowly raises her eyes, her expression impassive. "May I ask the reason for this request, officer?" Her tone is firm but polite, trying to avoid an unnecessary confrontation. The officer's face hardens. "It's a normal procedure. Just show us your papers." Sophie's heart beats faster, but she remains calm. She knows this moment is crucial. She takes a deep breath and responds with quiet determination. "With all due respect, officer, I deserve to know why I am being approached in this way." The second officer, a young man with very short blonde hair, appears visibly uncomfortable. "Listen, we're not trying to cause trouble. Just show your documents, and it'll be sorted." Sophie observes the surroundings. The square has become eerily silent, each passerby's gaze fixed on their interaction with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. The atmosphere is thick, a palpable tension that amplifies the weight of every gesture and word. The third officer, a stocky man with a face reddened by suppressed anger, suddenly erupts. "You think we're ignorant? A woman like you, alone here, watching everything that moves. You must have malicious intentions." The man's words hit Sophie like a punch. "A woman like me?" she repeats, her voice trembling slightly with indignation. "What do you mean by that, officer?" The imposing officer, realizing the situation is escalating, grabs Sophie's arm with disproportionate force. "You'd better watch your words," he says in a cold tone, barely veiling the threat. "We don't appreciate outsiders meddling in our affairs." Sophie abruptly pulls away from his grip, defiance flashing in her eyes. "I am not an outsider. I am here for a specific reason. You took an oath to serve and protect, didn't you?" The murmurs of the onlookers grow louder, some exchanging worried glances, others whispering disapproving comments about the officers. The atmosphere is electric, a mix of tension and curiosity that makes every second feel heavier. The second officer, realizing that the tension is at its peak, tries to calm the situation. "You don't understand," he says in a somewhat more conciliatory tone. "We're just doing our job. But you must understand that this town has its own rules and ways of doing things." Sophie, still on edge, responds with quiet intensity. "And do these rules allow you to violate individuals' rights or create a climate of fear?" As the situation seems on the brink of exploding, the stocky officer steps towards Sophie, his face twisted with anger. "That's enough. You're under arrest," he declares with an authoritarian voice. Sophie's heart races, but she refuses to give in to panic. She knows that showing any weakness could make matters worse. "On what grounds?" she asks, her voice calm and composed. But the man doesn't respond. He grabs her arm, this time with more force, and drags her toward the patrol car. The onlookers turn away, no one daring to intervene. The murmurs grow quieter, as if Sophie's arrest is a scene they've seen before and accepted. The officers push her into the car and slam the door shut. Sophie remains silent, staring out the window at the streets of this town, which, beneath its calm exterior, hides much deeper wounds. They take her to the police station, an old building on a quiet street corner. At the station, Sophie is led into a small interrogation room. The officers sit across from her, ready to question her. They still don't know who she is or why she's really there. To them, she's just a foreigner who dared to challenge their authority. "Now, you're going to tell us everything," begins the officer with a reddened face. "Who sent you? What are you really doing here?" His voice is filled with suspicion. Sophie straightens slowly in her chair, taking a deep breath. She's thought long and hard about this moment. From the start of her investigation, she had anticipated that this could happen. But she made a choice, never to reveal her true identity unless absolutely necessary. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she begins. "I'm here to understand." The officer laughs bitterly, contempt in his tone. "Understand what?"
"How we do our job."
"You have no idea what it's like to be here in this town." Sophie looks up at him, her thoughts swirling. She knows that her only chance is to remain calm and not get dragged into their game. "I'm here to investigate allegations of systemic discrimination. And so far, everything I've seen only confirms those allegations." Sophie's words fall like a stone in the room. The silence that follows is heavy. The stocky officer leans even closer, his face just inches from hers. "You think you'll trap us with your big words? You're nothing here." But Sophie, despite the pressure, remains calm. "You're right," she says slowly. "You don't know who I am." She watches them one by one, studying their reactions. The young blonde officer, who seemed uncomfortable earlier, looks like he's about to speak but holds back, nervously glancing at his colleagues. Sophie straightens even more in her chair, and for the first time, she reveals a hint of her true mission. "I work for the Ministry of Justice. You've been under investigation long before I arrived here. You thought I was just a visitor, but you were wrong. Every interaction, every word, every gesture since I arrived has been recorded. You think you're safe because you're in this small town, but the law extends far beyond Saint Remy." The officers exchange nervous glances, gradually realizing they might be in trouble. The silence in the room becomes almost oppressive, and the three men start moving with visible hesitation. The young blonde officer, who had seemed the most uncomfortable, finally speaks. You work for the Ministry of Justice?" he asks, his voice slightly trembling. He casts a furtive glance at his colleagues, who remain silent, the tension palpable. Sophie nods, her gaze fixed on the blonde officer.
"Yes."
"And everything that's happened up until now has been monitored. You acted as though no one was watching, but believe me, others were." The other officers, particularly the stocky one who had verbally attacked her, stiffen. Their faces harden, and fear begins to show in their eyes. They realize that this is no longer just an arbitrary arrest. It's become something much larger, with potential consequences for them. The chief officer, the one who had first asked for her papers, clears his throat and tries to regain control of the situation. "Look, maybe this is all a misunderstanding. We're just doing our job here. There was no need to dramatize things." Sophie, sensing that she now has the upper hand, remains calm and methodical. "You violated my rights by arresting me without a valid reason and treating me with disdain simply because of my background. All of this only confirms why I'm here." At that moment, the door to the small interrogation room bursts open. A man in a dark suit, wearing a Ministry of Justice badge, enters the room. His expression is serious, and he immediately addresses the officers with authority. "Gentlemen, I ask that you stand. You are under arrest for illegal detention and abuse of power." The man's voice rings out in the room, clear and sharp. Behind him, other ministry agents enter, ready to intervene. The officers, frozen in place, dare not move. The man turns to Sophie with a slight smile. "Ms. Laurent, is everything all right? We've recorded everything in real time, as agreed. You are no longer alone." Sophie nods, relieved but maintains her professionalism. "Thank you. I'm fine. But there is still much to be done here. The chief officer, pale, stammers as he searches for words. Wait, we didn't know. The ministry agent cuts off his excuses with a firm tone. You had a duty to uphold the law, and you ignored it. You will answer for your actions. Sophie stands up, her hands slightly trembling, but her gaze resolute. She knew this mission would be difficult, but she hadn't imagined that the truth would be so obvious. As she leaves the interrogation room, the officers are handcuffed and escorted out of the station, under the incredulous stares of their colleagues. In the car taking her back to the ministry, Sophie finally lets out a sigh. She has taken a big step toward justice, but she knows the journey is far from over. The small town of Saint Remy will never be the same after her visit, and the winds of change are starting to blow, even in the most remote corners. This story reminds us that sometimes it is necessary to challenge institutions in order for the truth to emerge. In the most difficult moments, courage and resilience can change the course of events. Like Sophie, we must all, in our own way, remain vigilant and not hesitate to act when our principles are at stake. The road to justice is rarely simple, but as this story shows, it is always possible to make a difference.